Welcome to our broadcast tonight. We'll talk to Harold Bloom. You know his book, The Western Canon. He is a Sterling professor at Yale University. He is also a professor of English at New York University, the author of 20 books, and the editor of many more. Bloom is a MacArthur Prize Fellow, a past Charles Eliot Norton professor at Harvard, and a member of the American Academy, and the recipient of many other awards, honorary degrees, and prizes. Also on this broadcast, the animated cartoonist Chuck Jones will be here, talking about the creation of his art. We begin with Harold Bloom. His new book is called, as I said, The Western Canon. But first, I'd like to begin our conversation by talking about the notion of what you think is happening to literature today.
To literature, Charles,
yes.
or to literary study?
To literary study.
To literary study. We just about haven't got it anymore. Yeah. I wouldn't think that there are 10 academic institutions of name and repute in the United States which still feature literary study as such.
Why is that?
It has been politicized by a combination of what I would have to call, though I don't wish to give offense, I suppose I do wish to give offense.
Yes, I know. It would be new if you didn't.
Pseudo-feminists, pseudo-Marxists, pseudo-historicists, calling themselves new, but nothing but mixtures of the French theorist Foucault and a lot of sarsaparilla. People who are in no way interested in aesthetic values, people who in fact have combined to assure all of us that what we call aesthetic value is a bourgeois mystification. Yeah. That is to say, no book, they say, is intrinsically better than any other book. These things are determined by the societal needs of the ruling classes. One would think that so crass and crude a doctrine would have been laughed out, but it's like our politics, my dear. You think things are going to be laughed out, and suddenly you discover there's been an avalanche and you have lost. And in the same way, there has been an avalanche, maybe from the other direction, in the universities and colleges.
So sort of the political correct came from one direction, and now the midterm election, you're saying, is coming from another election.
Yes.
Might the two collide? Or are they reinforcing each other in their own strange way?
I think they reinforce one another. I have received as many nasty letters from neoconservatives who denounced me because I refused to say that the function of studying canonical works is to reinforce our moral suppositions, or our...
Let me just, what do you mean by canonical works? I mean, I assume we're talking about the Western Canon and those that you have listed here, 26 of them, but...
Well, the canon really means, from Greek days onwards, and from ancient Hebraic and Christian days onwards, the works that a particular tradition designates as being most essential for study by the young in scholastic situations. The subtitle of this book of mine is The Books and School of the Ages. I have stolen that from the German end of the last century poet Stefan George, who was just talking about Dante. And he was simply saying that the Divine Comedy had been the book and school of the ages. Homer is the great instance of the canonical work. All of ancient Greek and then Alexandrian education was founded upon Homer, particularly upon the Iliad. Mm-hmm. The formation of what Christians call the Old Testament, that is to say the Hebrew Bible, and then the New Testament, was also a canonizing kind of a process. Though there, in the pure good of theory, the criteria were not supposed to be aesthetic, I sometimes wonder about that, since except for Leviticus, everything in the Hebrew Bible is of immense literary power, and there's a great deal of enormous literary power in the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of John in particular.
In the book of J, you suggested a lot of the Bible had been written by a woman.
I still stick with the notion that the crucial portions of Genesis, Exodus, and Numbers, that is to say, the earliest part of the Hebrew Bible to be written, was undoubtedly written by a highly placed woman at the court of Solomon. The attitude, the stance, the point of view is entirely that of a very highly placed and very sophisticated and very ironical woman indeed.
Let me just talk about one apparent, not contradiction, but somehow maybe a look of, a note of amusement by some people. They look at the Western Canon, and they look at the 26 canons, and they look at some 800 authors and 3,000 works that you list at the back, and they say, aha, here comes Harold Bloom, who is criticizing multiculturalism. He is criticizing too much emphasis on the gender or the race or the sexual persuasion of the writers, and that's part of what he talks about in the body of this book. Yet at the same time, you will find on his list of 870 writers a number of women, a number of African Americans,
a number of gays. Women, the African Americans, the gays, good heavens, a full 35 or 40% of major Western authors from the beginning to the present day must have been gay.
Yeah.
It would be very safe to assume William Shakespeare himself would appear to have been bisexual, whether or not scholars find an easy time in accepting that. There isn't anyone I have put on that list whom I have not read at least twice. If the work has sustained a second serious reading, then these people are mixing me up with the William Bennetts of this world or the late Alan Bloom, or this whole neo-conservative rabblement who are looking for moral values. I'm not looking for moral values.
But you are talking about what you call a school of resentment, which is
killing
the art of reading.
Comes from the other side, and it has largely destroyed the art of reading. It has given us the amazing phenomenon of multiculturalism. My favorite sentence in the book upon which you are holding your hand goes...
As if I'm swearing to.
If multiculturalism, rather good, if multiculturalism meant Cervantes, then who could protest?
Yeah.
But of course, multiculturalism doesn't mean Cervantes. It is not as though they are urging us to read Cervantes rather than Shakespeare or Dickens. Not so at all. They are asking us to read extremely inadequate Chicano writers. Now, I have no objection whatsoever to writers of any background being read. But as I also remark in one of my favorite sentences of the book, the biblical 80 years and 10, on the whole, still holds for us. If science came along and saw to it that we all lived 140 years on the average, then at the moment there would be no canonical problem. But we have 3,000 years of major imaginative literature in the West. We have a plethora.
And you are
of value.
suggesting it is about to become marginal?
It has been marginalized. It has been substantially marginalized. People are getting doctorates. People are getting undergraduate majors in literature or English, or call it what you will, in thousands of American colleges and universities, and this is not hyperbole, who have never read a play by Shakespeare, have never read one of the Canterbury Tales of Chaucer, who have never read a novel by Charles Dickens or a poem by William Wordsworth.
All right, stop. Let me just stop you there because I want to get to this in a sense. What would Professor Bloom say they'll get by reading Shakespeare and Chaucer?
Oh, I can go on. I can go on.
I know that's for the rest
of
the evening, but I've got 15 minutes.
I know of that, sir. Well, in the first place, I would say cognitive power. That is to say, an increase in one's own ability to think and one's own ability to talk on the basis of that thinking. And the next would be rhetorical power, the ability to understand better the uses of metaphor, which according to Aristotle was the special mark of genius in every one of us. But beyond all that, a real capacity for apprehending otherness, for, on the one hand, realizing that we are trapped inside our own mortality, and on the other, that our only hope of getting beyond that trap of mortality is to have some real sense of other selves. We read many books, is the ancient adage, because we cannot know enough people. You are still a young man. I am now getting to be a rather older man. One discovers as one gets older that it's difficult to know more and more people. That your old friends have pretty much said what they have to say to you, or you to them, and it's harder to make friends. One goes back to books because one cannot possibly know enough people. And I suppose it's deeper really than that. Memory is the major element in cognition, in everything that we call the humanities. If you cannot remember, then you can't think, and you can't imagine, and you can't write, and you can hardly read. If you have shallow authors chosen only for political reasons, or because supposedly they will make people of one ethnic background or another somehow feel good
self-esteem
about
is,
themselves,
or some sense of knowing,
raise self-esteem,
a connection to your
or that
past.
ridiculous metaphor we now call empowerment, which is cheerleading so far as I can tell. If you do that, you will not augment memory. You will not cause the mind to grow. You will put people into a state of another kind of poverty, a poverty that the school of resentment does not seem to care about. You know, poverty as imaginative need, poverty as imaginative lack.
We could have a whole program just on this, and I want to move beyond it, but does it have to be, I mean, where is there a recognition on your part, at least of giving some ground to some recognition that there may be merit in terms of recognizing the literary history of an ethnic group?
I give a great deal of ground on that, but I point out in many places, not always in that book, the oddity that it is by no means the best, the strongest, the most interesting writers of such groups who are being studied and exalted. As it happens, the best African-American poet by light years is a man named J. Wright, Jaywright. He is difficult and complex. He works in terms of Dogon mythology, West African mythology, and a vast range of European learning. He is just too difficult for Afro-American specialists to bother with, and they shrug him off. They do this to a considerable extent with the next most eminent poet, the late Robert Hayden, whom they also find too dense and too aesthetic for them. There is a brilliant young woman poet, Thylias Moss, Thyliasmoss, who's an African-American. She, too, has very inadequate...
Now, people have pointed out that, and this gets me into the list and other things I want to do, people pointed out Alice Walker is not in this book among your list of 850, nor is Maya Angelou.
A very charming lady.
Although Toni Morrison is, but not for the book that we thought, not for Beloved, but for Solomon's Song.
A very charming lady, Miss Walker, a very remarkable personality, Miss Angelou, and certainly Toni Morrison began as a very strong writer and reached a kind of culmination in Song of Solomon. Unfortunately, her sense of what she would call her responsibility to, she now calls herself, as you know, a Marxist, a feminist, an Afrocentrist, and all of these things, Beloved and Jazz, even more than Beloved, are, I think, top-heavy books with very strong political programs. They are not aesthetic accomplishments.
An aesthetic accomplishment is the standard.
An aesthetic accomplishment is Shakespeare or Tolstoy or William Faulkner. In the case of Miss Morrison, she blent Virginia Woolf and Faulkner very powerfully in her early work, and it did culminate in the Song of Solomon. She has been, I believe, victimized by the times in trying to give the age what she feels the age demands. Miss Walker is quite another matter. I have read Meridian twice. I suppose it would be my candidate for the poorest work of its kind that is now being studied in American universities and colleges. I mean, it can only possibly be read and studied on a political basis. It has nothing resembling aesthetic merit. As for Miss Angelou, I have gotten many people angry at me by saying at the beginning of the book, quoting the divine Oscar Wilde as having said splendidly, all bad poetry is sincere, and then saying that the New York Times, the day after the inauguration of President Clinton, praised the inaugural poem by Maya Angelou as a work of Whitmanian amplitude, to which I can only reply, it is a work of astonishing sincerity.
All right, let me talk about it. Did you write this because of how you feel about the plight of literary study?
I wrote it for, well, I quote my heroic precursor, Dr. Samuel Johnson.
Yes.
No man but a blockhead would write for anything except money.
Yes.
But once we put that immediate matter aside,
Yeah.
and we go on to, shall we say, more aesthetic and spiritual and educational motives, I wrote it for two reasons. One, because I have seen my profession, I'm now in my 40th consecutive year of teaching at Yale, I have seen my profession destroyed by what I call the school of resentment.
And so you rise in this book to say this is what's important.
This is what matters. Even though, as I say, this is an elegy, I think we have lost the war. I think that...
Irreversible, you believe.
Well, you know, there is this special difficulty, Charles. If you have faculties, because of this pernicious thing we call tenure, perhaps in these days in which the Republicans say they're going to do away with term limits.
They do away with tenure as well.
I hardly see the Speaker Gingrich doing away with his own term. But
Well,
perhaps indeed it might not be
I
such a
suspect-
bad idea
I
to do away with tenure. Because what we have now
Boy,
are,
you know, you just sent them into terror at Yale.
we have networks all over the place at every American school and university. We have networks of people who are hard at work all the time as activists, making sure that only the politically correct come in as graduate students or get teaching appointments.
The standard, you made the choices. So we're saying this is one man's taste and one man's opinion.
Charlie, the works of the second half of the 20th century on my list, from all kinds of
Got your
traditions and
list somewhere, I'm
languages
looking for it.
and so on, 50 years from now, there are bound to be howlers on that list. As I remark in the book, cultural prophecy is a mug's game.
Yeah.
Dr. Samuel Johnson made some ghastly mistakes. Ralph Waldo Emerson thought that William Ellery Channing was going to be a major American poet. I have undoubtedly committed some blunders and howlers also.
Yeah.
It is built into the process. All one can do is try to set aside one's idiosyncratic preferences, and I am a rather idiosyncratic human being, so it is not easy to do so, and look for what I hope is aesthetic merit.
You have mentioned Emerson and now Dr. Johnson several times. You even gave him credit as being your historic precursor.
Well, that is paying myself a considerable compliment.
Well, it is because, in a sense, in anxiety, the influence, anxiety, and what was it, anxiety and...
The Anxiety of Influence.
The Anxiety
Yes,
of Influence.
yes,
Your book, you talk about the notion of great writers
Well,
come to greatness because there is a precursor, and that what they are driven to do
they're the
is
blocking
to...
agent.
Go ahead, explain.
No, go on with what you're saying.
They're-
I was
they're-
just rephrasing it. I mean,
They are driven to blocking. They are driven to distinguish themselves apart from their precursor, and only the best and the strongest have the will and the strength to do
Exactly
that.
so. A number of reviewers of this book, I particularly remember a gentleman in Time magazine, got very obstreperous about this. The fellow in Time magazine said, doesn't Professor Bloom realize that to use the agonistic, the literary competitive, is just as much to use an extra literary category as the multiculturalists do, to which I could only throw up my hands and say, has he never read, let alone Jakob Burckhardt or Nietzsche, on the fact that agon is the entire basis of Greek intellectual and cultural and literary life, that is to say among the ancients.
Yeah.
Homer's contest with Hesiod, or the fact that in the Athenian drama you are competing for the foremost place. You are competing for the prize. Western literature, whether we like it or not, aesthetically speaking, aesthesis is a Greek word.
Right.
It means perception. And Western literature, the whole basis of the aesthetic, remains Greek, and that was agonistic to the heart's core. It was always a competition for the foremost place.
Let me just take a moment, if anybody hasn't heard your list. William Shakespeare, Chaucer, Cervantes, Milton, Samuel Johnson, Goethe, Wordsworth, Jane Austen, Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, Charles Dickens, George Eliot, Leo Tolstoy, but not, guess what, not for War and Peace.
Well,
for Haji
Murad. I'm delighted you bring this up. In the news the last few days, we have the stuff about the Russians closing in on the Chechens.
Right.
This is the renewal of the war that is being fought in Haji Murad. Haji Murad is Shamil's right-hand man who has broken with him.
Right.
He is the legendary hero to this day of the Chechens. A lot of those people, that is to say, Tolstoy has really intersected reality here.
Right.
It is a historical novel, or novella in this case, much closer to something prevalent and permanent in human nature. And I must say, there indeed is the use of the canonical. It is perpetually relevant. If you wish to understand, you know, the new horrors that are now breaking out among the Chechens and Yeltsin closing in upon them, read Haji Murad.
I wish we had more time. I'll continue. Ibsen, Freud, interesting things you have to say about Freud, that if in fact you look to a precursor for Freud, it was clearly Shakespeare, and all that Freud thought he had discovered you could find in the works of Shakespeare.
He had found in
that
the
Shakespeare
works
had
of
found,
Shakespeare,
and that Freud saw them there. Is that right?
Yes.
And
As
you
I-
go
as I
on to
remarked in the
Neruda
book-
and Pessoa and Beckett and
Yeah.
Borges and Kafka and Virginia Woolf and James Joyce, Orlando, Virginia Woolf.
Well, I chose that really as a kind of dare to the feminists. They have made her into a Bible. They've made her into what they call a political theorist. And I wanted to show that her feminism, as is particularly made clear in Orlando, is nothing but the love of reading.
The pleasure of
fierce love
doing this
reading.
broadcast in New York is I can get you back here because you also teach at NYU. The Western Canon, the Books and School of the Ages, Harold Bloom. We'll be right